Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are going back to some of the coziest, most peak JRPGs of all time, the Trails in the Sky trilogy. Trails in the Sky FC stands as one of our first ever, oh my gosh, that did really well, we didn't expect that at all, videos here on Retro Rebound. It's what I call a Hail Mary video. You kind of throw it up there because you want to make it, it means a lot to you, and you hope it means a lot to others. It was such a pleasant surprise to see, even now when you search up Trails in the Sky, that our video is one of the first that pops up. For those unaware, I'm a massive Trails fan, going all the way up to Daybreak, which yes, I aim to review soon. Now's a great time to be talking about Trails, because speaking of Hail Marys, as we record this, we don't know if it's happening, but the 20th anniversary is coming up on Trails in the Sky, the whole Trails series. And Falcom seems to be gearing up for a bit of a celebration. And I'm crossing my fingers that they are doing something with Trails in the Sky. Right now, it's easy to access Zero, Azure, all of the Cold Steel games, Reverie, as well as Daybreak. They're all on PlayStation or Switch. You can find them everywhere, PC. But then you have the Sky Trilogy, where it all began. And I'll get into why it's so important that you play these games beyond them being good, but it's right there, only on PC. Nowhere else, no console release, no console port. All you have is a PS3 version that's Japan only, as well as a PS Vita version, both stuck over there in the East. So my hope is that, one, they just port these games. I would be totally fine with that if they did exactly what they did with Zero and Azure and just brought those over. Or two, they decide to remake these games with the Trails Through Daybreak engine, because oh my god, that game is just so good. Still my game of the year. So yes, it just feels like a good time to talk about Trails and remind people of how phenomenal this whole series is, as we'll do more with our Trails Through Daybreak video coming up, but really here celebrating this 20th anniversary of one of the most unique JRPG franchises in all of gaming. If you're new here and you've never heard of Trails, just stick with me, because this may be the discovery of your next favorite series you never heard of. So bear with me. Otherwise, consider subscribing. Let's begin right there at the start, Trails in the Sky FC. Now, I'm not gonna sell you too high on Trails in the Sky FC. If there's anything I miss about Trails in the Sky FC, it's the coziness. There is no single other JRPG I've become nostalgic for quicker than Trails in the Sky FC. It's a simple adventure. Estelle and Joshua become bracers after growing up together, and they go on this adventure seeing all of Liberl and what's going on out here, and basically they're mercenaries for hire, sometimes beating up a couple of bad guys, sometimes fixing a leaky faucet. They're just there to help out when the need arises, and that's really it for the most part until you get toward the very tail end of the story and things heat up dramatically. Now, I am not trying to sell it low to you, it's just that compared to the highs of this franchise, Trails in the Sky is very comfortable in its quiet moments, in its character interactions. And as Trails always does, that means lots and lots and lots of dialogue, character banter, and world building. Sky FC is so important because it's literally a full game dedicated to building the world. They could have spread this out over 3 games, but the reason that Sky SC is one of my favorite video games of all time, and that Sky the Third is also one of my favorite Trails games ever, is because they don't have to spend time building the world. That's already been done. Now it's just time to go. It's time to deliver on all these stories with relentless pace, and that's the name of the game with Trails. But it really begins here with FC, which is about a 40-hour adventure. And yeah, it may catch you yawning a few times. It's a pretty high investment. But look, I know a series that's more popular that people are willing to bite the bullet on and do the same thing for in Final Fantasy. All I ever hear is, hey, you want to get into Final Fantasy 14? You do have to play a Realm Reborn. Yeah, I know it's like 50 hours of mundane activities, but I swear it's important, and all the expansions afterwards are peak. You've heard that before, right? Take that in a single player series, and honestly, I'd say lower the exaggerations of their boredom. Trails in the Sky FC has some of the best turn-based combat you can find in gaming. Why do I say that? Because they barely evolved the system for so many entries in this series outside of new mechanics here and there, because it really, in my opinion, never needed it. It's not truly until you see in Cold Steel and then a couple entries later in Cold Steel 3, and I would say at Kuro, or really Daybreak, I'm sorry, I'm using the Japanese name now, that's when you see a true full evolution and transformation of what the Trails combat system is. But for the most part, it's incremental, and it's all built off of Sky FC, with just some of the most rewarding turn-based combat ever. It's one of the most buildcraft-centric RPGs you can play, where you find your quartz, you slot them into your orbments, and you get all access to spells and abilities, and some of these different quartz will power up your stats, so there's a lot to consider, each character having their own sets of skills that they can use, which requires SP to use. There's just an immense amount of depth in this combat, and then when you pull it all together with this cozy vibe, this interesting world, the wonderful combat, and the music, which you've already been hearing in the background of this video. Trails in the Sky, this trilogy has some of the best JRPG music you will ever experience. It will soothe your soul on some of your worst days, and it will uplift you on some of your best days. I'm talking about this from experience. I remember when I went and spoke to my fiance's parents saying I wanted to propose to her. Guess what soundtrack I was listening to on the way home? All smiles. It was Trails in the Sky. This is like the soundtrack to my life, is how I describe it. It really is that good. So yes, Sky FC is dedicated entirely to world building, but it's absolutely worth the dive. As we're here celebrating this anniversary and Trails is on the brain, yes, you do have an uphill climb in the terms of the amount of games you gotta go through, but I promise you it's worth it. Let's get into that a little bit, talking about the sequel, Trails in the Sky SC. As you'll note here, I'm not going to talk about story details. You're just going to see a lot of combat and world exploration and very specific scenes of dialogue. Trails is what I call a very dangerous series. Now, Toshihiro Kondo will tell you every single day of the week that you can just fire up Trails in the later entries and you'll be fine and you can keep playing there. He's a businessman as well as a creator. Don't you forget that, okay? You can't really hop in later in the Trails series like, hey, Maddie, this game here, Trails from Zero, looks really good. I want to play as a cop in a JRPG. Can I pick this one up and start here? I am a little bit more forgiving saying yes, you can, but inevitably you'll have to go back to get context and understanding, because what Trails does, which is so magnificent, is that each game is connected. And that is no exaggeration. In a sense, Trails from Zero is Trails in the Sky 4, really. And as they move on into Azure, that's a strong sequel to Zero, but it's building on so many elements that were introduced in the Sky trilogy. And then when you move into Cold Steel, it's a completely different art style, yes, and it's fully 3D, yes, but much of the events that happened in these past few games are all referenced in Cold Steel 1 and 2, especially before there's a bit of a time skip. It's not just world building, it's not reading a codex and going, okay, I know the nitty gritty. Like, these are need to know details, because certain characters are going to be showing up at certain points and they're big deals, but you'll just sit there and have it gloss over you, go over your head, and you'll think, well, what's the big deal there? You will miss so much of what makes these games special, and that is the continuity. Now, I know the second game in the franchise maybe isn't the best representation of that, but while we're talking about moving the story forward, it's a pretty good time to mention it. One of the things I did say earlier is that Trails in the Sky SC, second chapter, is one of my favorite video games ever. Why is that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, pacing is a bit of a problem in Sky FC, and frankly, it's kind of a problem with the whole series. There's moments where it is rip-roaring and you're sitting there going, Falcom, yes, keep going. This is exactly what we need in our JRPGs, but they are never hesitant to slow down. However, after the first, I would say, 8 hours of Trails in the Sky SC, it is some of the most emotional moments in JRPG storytelling that I've experienced, combined with that fantastic combat, combined with some of the best party members that I've experienced in a game. You of course have Olivier, you have the relationship between Agate and Tita growing, you have characters like Louvet, who I love Louvet so much, you have Joshua coming into his own. There's so many wonderful characters in this trilogy. It blows my mind, honestly, that Trails isn't as popular as it should be, because I know it's growing, but I feel like it should just be broadcast in the same way that Final Fantasy is, in the same way that Persona is. Especially because you look at the evolution of this series, you see the gameplay on screen, and some people aren't crazy about this art, but this is what I talk about with the immediate nostalgia. I'm like many of you. I saw this game, I saw the people, walking in place, and I was thinking, this is such a weird looking game visually. Like, what's going on here? Like, it reminds me a bit of Final Fantasy, but a little bit of sprite art too, like old school Final Fantasy, but it's on this 3/4 camera angle, is 45-degree camera angle. Like, it's really weird and different looking, and it has this 3D feel while being 2D. Like, it's so strange. But as I got away from Trails in the Sky, and as I wrapped up my Trails Exodus and caught up on the whole series, when I was playing other games and talking with buddies and reflecting on Trails, I immediately yearned for not only this art style, but also the same feelings that this series has given me. But man, the art style, I miss this chibi, cozy pixel art look so much. I wish they would go back and do HD 2D styles with these games, but I wouldn't complain as well if they did a full remake, again, similar to what they're doing with Daybreak, and just had Trails in the Sky running that way. What's also worth noting is you've kind of caught up on the names by this point. Second chapter, first chapter, the third, what's going on here? One thing that Falcom is extremely good at, especially in today's game development environment, is reusing assets in a very meaningful way. As in, they get their games out frequently and on time, but it's also because when you're living in that world, you're existing in that world, it makes sense why they would reuse certain visuals. And so that's why the games get built out quicker, because they can just focus on content and testing. But what this also leads to is sometimes the story is split up. I don't want to tell you when, outside of here with first chapter and second chapter. It matters a little bit less nowadays because everything is so readily available that if you're flying through the series and you get to that moment of, oh man, that's a cliffhanger, many Trails fans had to wait years for it to come to the West to get the answers to what happened in the cliffhangers. Whereas nowadays, it's easier to burn through the series. And also, they've done a much better job with, not ending on cliffhangers, being a lot more conclusive with their storytelling, which I think is good for the health of the series and their players, quite frankly. But yes, Trails in the Sky FC and SC are two parts of a full story. Technically, if you were to ask me, this is really a full 80-hour JRPG, but it's just been broken up into two parts. And what I also love about the Trails series, getting into the final entry we're going to talk about here, Sky the Third, is how they kind of flip their own formulas on the head. So in Sky SC and FC, you're running around Liberl and you're exploring this world, learning more about these characters. So now in Sky the Third, you're playing as not Estelle, but a new protagonist. Okay, I admire when games do this because now we're kind of getting to that MGS2 territory, right? You think back then, like, okay, Estelle's the lead of this franchise. So what's next in her journey? Nope. Not her this time. And this series has a slew of protagonists that you'll attach yourself to over time. For reasons I won't explain, you end up in a place called Phantasma in Sky the Third, and now it's starting to pull all the characters that you've seen throughout this entire series together. Why is this important? Because one of the best things about Trails is they have so many Avengers Endgame moments, more than any series I've ever played. Like all those moments, I see people talking about Final Shape right now, like all those moments of everyone coming together. Imagine that like every few games in a JRPG series. That's what you get in Trails. This is the moment everyone you've met in Sky is coming together. Characters that you never thought would be playable are playable. You have new gimmicks here, like you have these doors that you'll go through. Some are long visual novel sections just rooted completely in storytelling. Others are challenges. Some are complete dungeon dives. And it leads to what I think is another really heartfelt story. Admittedly, though, for some, a bit divisive. For me, I love this game. I mean, I love like pretty much every game in this series at this point, but that shouldn't surprise anyone. It's just such a phenomenal journey. But Sky the Third is such an important game for the franchise moving forward because still to this day, to this very day, including the next entry coming up very soon, things are very relevant from that game and are appearing in new stuff. Like, this is a treasure trove of lore for Falcom just to dive into and keep pulling things out of it. It's like a bottomless pit. They just keep finding new things to reference. And that's the most special thing about this series. If I were to put one thing into your head as we wrap things up here, it's that it's a series that beckons you to pay very close attention to the smallest of details. And that's what makes group playthroughs such a fun thing with Trails. I think that it's great if you play it on your own, but playing it alongside friends, whether you're hopping in Discord calls together and playing alongside each other, or you're all going through the series and then kind of convening to discuss at the end of games, you will pick up so many details that you have overlooked. It really is such a special franchise to me, and I hope many of you try it out. So, happy 20th anniversary to the Trails series. Absolutely lovely. Cannot say enough good things about it. Here's the Hail Mary video for you. Hopefully it finds its audience and many of you try out this wonderful JRPG series, because all I'm trying to do is give you the nudge. Once you get the Trails fever, I'm telling you, that's it. It's done for. You're going to keep going. It just takes one nudge. So many people are like, oh man, but I got to get through so many JRPGs, got so much games to play. Look, I do this for a living. I review so many games. I beat the whole series in a single year, okay? Like, trust me, it is that good. You will find the time. So enjoy. It's on me. And let me know what you think of Trails down below. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.